Hey there, in this video I am going to be explaining 3 things that are actually more important than the evidence in getting your domestic violence charges dropped, especially before court. My name is Veronica. I'm a domestic violence defense attorney here in California, and I help people put their cases behind them so that they can enjoy their lives and their freedom. Now, if you were recently arrested for domestic violence, you may be thinking about the evidence, why it was so unjust in many cases, it really is, that the police arrested you, that there really wasn't strong evidence. Maybe the alleged victim lied. Maybe the alleged victim felt pressured. Maybe the alleged victim didn't even give any evidence against you to the police, but the police arrested you anyway. And when you're thinking about all the reasons why the charges should be dropped, that is probably what you are focusing on the most. But there are actually 3 things, and this surprised me when I first started handling these cases over 10 years ago. There are actually 3 things that are more important to getting the case dropped. So let's jump right into exactly what those are. And make sure, by the way, that you stay tuned for number 3, because that is the one that is, in my experience, and again, I've been doing this for over 10 years, in my experience, in my opinion, is the most important out of all of them. Number 1, the good things about you and your lack of criminal history. So when you're thinking, hey, look, I've never been arrested before in my life. I've never even gotten a parking ticket. I've never gotten a speeding ticket, nothing. When you're thinking of all the reasons why you're a good person, I have a good job. I'm a productive member of society. I volunteer. I go to church every Sunday. Whatever it may be, all those reasons why you're a good person, those actually do make a big difference. And it's really important that your attorney has all of that information and that they present it to the DA. Number 2, character letters. Character letters are letters from family, friends, people in the community, anybody who knows you, who can talk about why you're a good person. And the more descriptive that they can be, the better. If they've known you for a long time, that's great. If they have some sort of credentials, I've had retired police officers, current police officers, state senators in one case, who are willing to write letters for a client of mine, that can really help. But maybe you don't have any of those people. You don't know anybody like that who can write a character letter for you. Well, I've even used letters. Literally, my client could only get a letter from his wife. It was such a great letter. Ultimately, I used that to his advantage. He did not have a domestic violence case. It was a much more serious case where he was facing serious prison time. And ultimately, with the help of that letter and all the good things about him, I was able to get him a deal that was just probation. Number 3, timing. Timing is everything with domestic violence cases. You need to hire an attorney before your first court date to contact the prosecution and try to get the prosecution to drop the case. Because as you have probably seen now that you've been in one of these situations, unfortunately, the police oftentimes will make an arrest first and ask questions later. They might have even told you that sometimes they say due to O.J. Simpson or due to current politics, they have to make an arrest whenever there's a domestic violence call. That's not exactly true, but many police officers in a domestic violence situation will just make an arrest even when there's not a lot of evidence. And if the DAs prosecuted every single one of those domestic violence cases, they wouldn't be able to prosecute the murder cases. They wouldn't be able to do anything else. They would be so overwhelmed. So since this is a really common arrest, and they know that sometimes these cases can be difficult to prove, the DAs really look at these domestic violence cases with an eye for, should this case be filed at all? And if this was a felony arrest, was this really a felony, even if everything in the police report is true, or was this more of a misdemeanor? Now, if you were arrested, you know that whatever is in the police report is not going to be good for you, right? The police are going to try to justify their arrest. It's going to seem reasonable from what they wrote down. But if you have an attorney contacting the DA before court with character letters, with a letter describing you as a person and who you are and the reasons why you're a good person, then the DA knows a few things. Number 1, they know that you have an attorney. They know that you are fighting this thing, and that alone can be really valuable when they have a stack of these cases and they know only about half of them can be filed and they're trying to figure out which stack to put your case on. If they know, okay, your case, you're going to fight it. You're not just going to take the first deal with a public defender or something. You're not going to just accept having this on your record, especially if you don't have a record. That alone may be enough to get them to drop it. But they have a lot of discretion when they're deciding whether or not to file one of these cases. And when they can see this is someone who is a good person, who, if you read enough of these police reports, if you handle domestic violence cases, then you realize, unlike most of the public who doesn't you don't really know, you realize that anybody could find themselves in these situations, especially if you're a guy. You get into a loud argument, maybe your girlfriend is screaming at you, a neighbor calls the cops, and all of a sudden you find yourself in handcuffs. It really happens. And if your attorney can show the DA, look, this is a normal, upstanding citizen, just like you, Mr. DA, who just found themselves in this situation, and this isn't a criminal, this is not an abuser, that goes a long way. And the character letters are there to show that other people feel the same way about you, that people are willing to put their reputations on the line with the DA to explain that you're a good person, that you had people you could call who will vouch for you. Not everyone has that, and if you do, that can be really helpful. Typically, by the way, I ask clients to get 3 to 5 letters. I've had clients who do a lot of volunteering in the community. They are really well connected, and they're able to get like 25 of them. If those are all good letters, that's great. But if you can get 3 to 5 letters that are personalized to you, ideally not from your immediate family members, then that can go a long way. So family, friends, if you have any colleagues, and I know it can be a bit tricky to ask them for these, but that can go a very long way to getting the case dismissed. But what is important is that that attorney contacts the DA before court, before they make a decision of which pile your case is on. Because once they file charges against you, which they usually don't do until a few days before the court date, they usually don't make a decision until then. Once they file those charges, it is much more difficult to get the case dismissed, because instead of having a DA looking at the case, whose job it is to use discretion and figure out which pile to put your case on, file felony charges, misdemeanor charges, or drop the whole thing altogether. Now you have a DA who instead has been assigned to prosecute this case against you. And if you can avoid that, then absolutely that is what you want to do. So it's so important to do that early. I know a lot of people are thinking, maybe I can just wait till the first court date and see what happens. The problem is, though, that once you wait till the first court date and the charges are filed, it's going to be so much more difficult to get them dropped. And I get calls from people who their case already was filed. And I'm looking at the case. I hear about who they are as a person. Maybe they have no criminal history or very little. They can get character letters. And I'm thinking, if you had just called me, a month or 2 ago, I probably could have gotten this thing dropped before court. But instead, we're going to court. We're dealing with the DA. We're trying to keep your record clean. But it's so much harder of a case than if I had just gotten this earlier on. But you can't go backwards. I mean, that's the problem. You have this window of golden opportunity before the first court date, and once the case is filed, you lose that. It's going to be very, very hard and perhaps impossible without going to trial to get a case like that dismissed. Now, again, I know that this stuff can seem kind of counterintuitive, because you're like, but there were no injuries, or she put makeup on to make it look like a bruise. I've had numerous cases like that. Or that was an old bruise that she had, or she didn't go to the hospital, or her story made no sense. And I keep saying she because that's the most common, but it could be he as well. I've had plenty of female clients who are accused of domestic violence too, with male victims. But all of that, the thing is, in the police report, is not really going to be laid out in your favor. And that is all that the DA is looking at, other than what your attorney submits and your criminal history or lack thereof. So these 3 things are extremely important, perhaps more important than the actual evidence when getting a case dropped, especially if it's before court. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you do have a domestic violence case in California, especially if you haven't been to the first court date, you can book a call with me if you'd like to do that. You can find my number down below. You can also book a consultation directly via the link there.